Howdy y'all, I am Icegold, and today I'm making another Ultimate Darkmoor guide because the last one that I made was a little rushed and I kind of just sort of meandered around, talked about pointless stuff and made it really long. So that's not what we're going to do today, and instead I'm going to tell y'all exactly what to expect from all of the boss fights in Darkmoor, and each of the 3 dungeons. We've got Castle Darkmoor right here is the first one, the Upper Halls is the second, and the Graveyard, which I was at the very beginning of the video, is the third and final one. And I will also be going over all of the gear that you can get from Darkmoor, because this is truly just like the absolute best place to farm once you hit level 100. So I mean, it really is a major power spike in your wizard's journey, and the spell that you get for some schools is an immense power spike, you know, and there's just so much to get here from Darkmoor, and it is probably the singular most important side quest you will ever do between levels 0 and 170, 180, 190, whenever y'all click on this video, whenever the max level is. So for the time being, let us go ahead and get started with the first dungeon, that being Castle Darkmoor. The first fight that you will encounter in Darkmoor as a whole, but more specifically the first dungeon in Castle Darkmoor, is going to be Howling Chaney, Dick Cheney's, lesser known brother. Looks like him too. So this is the first boss. He is a life boss with 20,000 HP. And he has, honestly, some pretty strong hits. He will start with a good amount of pips, and, he's got blades, traps, a bunch of different kinds of traps to stack up, and, he can hit you for a good bit, but I think that I can confidently say this is the easiest boss in all of Darkmoor. This is very easy to solo, and all you really need to do is just blade up and do your thing, and you'll mostly be fine. It's just the main deal with him is that he has 25% outgoing pierce, which is not a small number, especially for this part of the game, and you'll notice that all of these Darkmoor bosses have a lot of pierce, and as we go along, that number is going to get higher and higher, so just be wary, and I would not recommend soloing any amount of Darkmoor. So definitely get yourself a team for all of that. So that is very important. There's a couple cheats that Howling Chaney has. The first one is, you like the taste of life. That's a line that he says if you cast a healing spell. And whenever you cast a healing spell, he'll say that, and then he'll cast a gnomes on you. He'll cheat cast that gnomes on you, and it'll do some good damage. So try not to heal. Just try to stay alive as best you can. So there's that. And then he also has a life interrupt cycle where he'll put just a 12% version of life spear on himself, so basically just increasing that pierce number, and then at the beginning of the 3rd round and every 3 rounds thereafter he will interrupt cast a life fuel on a random wizard. So just something to keep in mind. He will always have a buff on you in this fight, so very important. But otherwise, Howling Chaney does not have much else to him. He also does not drop anything notable, so keep that in mind. The next one up, however, is a real dizzy, and he will show you exactly why this dungeon and Darkmoor as a whole is very difficult, especially for level 100s. That being Sir Blackwater. And something very important is that a lot of these bosses have these cheat cycles. Now, Sir Blackwater is a star boss with 18,000 health, but he has masteries of Storm, Life, and Death, all 3 of which do have an interrupt cycle with his cheats. But before we get to that, very important to start off, he has a cheat where, if you cast a positive charm, so just sort of any blade or any bubble, he will interrupt cast Disarm on the wizard who cast the spell. And that does mean that you can technically blade teammates, so keep that in mind. He is much easier with a team, but if you're doing it solo like I did, don't. That's what I'll say right now. But there's that, and he will also cheat cast a Dark Pact on himself if you place any type of weakness on him, so be sure to keep that in mind as well. But Virulent Plague and other AoE weakness spells do not trigger this. Now let's get to the cheat cycles. The first one is his death cycle, and the death cycle being first is why this boss is as tough as he is. Because at the end of every round in the cycle, he will interrupt cast a sacrifice on himself, and I already said you can't use single blades against him because he will disarm them immediately. And because his first interrupt cycle is this death cycle where he sacrifices on himself every turn, you also can't use feints. So that's very important. Basically, you can't do much in the way of buffing on the first in the first 5 rounds. So that is very, very important. And at the beginning of the 5th round in this cycle, he will interrupt cast an Age of Reckoning, which is a 20% pierce and critical death bubble, a Virulence, which is a 25% outgoing death aura, and 45% death blade, and lastly a Call of Curlew, which does mass. So, I mean, needless to say. And he's also got 35 pierce on him, so good luck resisting him. That's what I'll say right there. And then his life cycle comes next. Darkmoor armors us. He'll cast a 500 spirit armor on himself every time he says that. That's the end of every round in that cycle. And he will also do another 5th round interrupt where he'll say, I am steadfast in my resolve. He will interrupt cast a Sanctuary, Cycle of Life, which is an outgoing healing aura on himself, a Guiding Light. So effectively 3 different healing buffs, and then he will cast a Rebirth on him and his team. So keep that in mind. He will heal himself for quite a bit right there. And then the Storm interrupt cycle. This is usually, if you get here, you're probably dying. I'm going to give it a bug. He'll say, I lay on hands at the end of every round in this cycle, which means he will cast Healing Current on himself. And then at the beginning of the 5th round in the Storm interrupt cycle, he will interrupt cast Astrophobia, which is the exact same type thing as Age of Reckoning, where it's a 20% Storm, Pierce, and critical bubble. So that takes it up to 55 outgoing Pierce under that bubble for Storm spells. Galvanic Field, Stormblade, and Glowbug Squall. And once that happens, you're probably dead. Let's be real. So yeah, definitely get a team for Sir Blackwater. That's very important. Absolutely, you need a team for this guy. He also does not drop anything of note, but this is the last boss here in Castle Darkmoor. So there is that to think about, but there is one more thing within Castle Darkmoor that I do at least want to mention, and that is a Stone Skeleton Key chest room. And if you have a Stone Skeleton Key, you can open the door, I believe, after you finish the fight with Sir Blackwater, and you can roll the loot from the chest that's in there. And what that chest is most known for is the Darkmoor Mastery Amulets, which will give you a little bit of extra accuracy and damage to a certain school. And obviously, you know, mastery of that specific school. So pretty neat, but I also would not recommend going for that just because it's so annoying and the drop rates are so low. So keep that in mind as well. And just as a very, very brief interjection here, there is a puzzle after you defeat Sir Blackwater in the observatory, and basically all you really need to do to solve this puzzle is interact with a wooden crate that displays the name Crimson Lens, and then interact with a lever that displays the name Neutral Density Filter. That will finish the puzzle, and you will not have to fight a bunch of mobs, so yeah, there you go. Now it is time for the second dungeon, being the Upper Halls. Now, this dungeon has 3 major bosses as well as a bunch of mobs just sort of running around. And one thing that I will say is, outside of the first instance where you see mobs, you can just walk around them. So, yeah, I mean, you got to be careful about it, but definitely, like, you can just walk around the mobs that are running around in circles. But you cannot avoid the fights with the bosses. The first of which being Akhtang WormCrawl. Now, this is a fire boss with 40% outgoing pierce. This is very, very tough to deal with because he is a damaged school and 40 pierce. You know, it's like, just try not to die. That's kind of what's going on. And he has 3 storm minions, the Draconian Eidolons, and these things hit for a lot. They also know Stormlord and Storm Dragon, the first of which will stun, obviously, but the second of which will put a 50% mantle on you, on top of doing even more damage. They also know Disarm and Enfeeble. Not that you're going to be blading too much in this fight anyway, because Akhtang himself has a cheat similar to that of Sir Blackwater, where he will say, I rip it from you if a wizard casts a charm or a global spell. However, unlike Sir Blackwater, Akhtang will cast his Steel Charm on the recipient of the charm. So this basically means you can't actually blade your teammates, and that does shake things up a little bit. Also, because he is a fire boss, if you do elemental blade, if you're like an ice or a storm for example, you can keep your blade, but he will get a fire blade that he can use. So just keep that in mind as well. And that on top of the buffs that he already knows, you know, fire blade, his own fire blade of course, and then fire trap and fuel, like just be careful of him. So there's that as well, and he can furnace, so just something to keep in mind. Otherwise, he is not too terribly hard. You just have to stack feints, and that is honestly not hard to do, like I said, but you got to make sure you stay alive, because it is him and those 3 storm minions, so be sure you handle them quickly as well. Now it is time for the Spirit of Darkmoor, and this is the second boss encountered in the upper halls, and she has a number of cheats. I will say that she does not remove any buffs, but she does still punish them if you cast a blade or a global spell. Basically, she will say Burn Wizard, and she will cheat cast an enhanced version of Scald, which does roughly 1,000 fire damage over 3 rounds to all wizards. So if you are in a team, this can really stack up quick. She has 40% outgoing Pierce, so also something to keep in mind. She has masteries of Fire, Myth, and Life, as well as Balance, and we will go over her cheat cycles in a moment. But her other notable cheat is if a wizard places a trap on the Spirit of Darkmoor, she will cheat cast a version of Assail, which is a myth wand hit type deal, and that'll do 850 myth damage and place 2 35% myth traps on the wizard. So keep that in mind as well. And as well, this one is kind of an interesting one. If a wizard defeats a minion, she will cast a sun version of Eternal Leviathan, which is like a life Leviathan type deal, and that will deal 777 life damage to the wizard and revive the minion with 777 HP. So yeah, you can't go for the minions first, is pretty much what I'm getting at here. So now it's time for the interrupt cycles. Now the myth one is the first one. This place defeats us all. That is the first line that she says at the end of every round of the cycle. Spirit of Darkmoor will cast Pierce on a random wizard. Honestly, not too terribly notable, like I'll say that. And then at the beginning of the 5th round in that cycle, she will cast a Myth Spear, a Myth Blade, a Saga of Heroes, so basically the exact same thing as Sir Blackwater, just with Myth instead, and she will cast a Mystic Colossus, which is an AoE Myth hit, so be careful of that. Her life interrupt cycle, she will say, Darkmoor holds my spirit. At the end of every round in the cycle, she will cast a version of Minor Blessing on herself, also not too terrible, I guess. And then at the beginning of the 5th round, she will cast a Life Spear, Life Blade, Namaste, which, as you probably guessed by now, 4 pip, 20% life, pierce, and critical bubble. It just is the same as Saga of Heroes and all the ones from before. And then she will cast a Hungry Caterpillar on the highest threat wizard. Now what that means is this is the wizard with the most blades and hanging effects active, so just keep that in mind as well. And that will end the life cycle. And then the fire cycle is the last one, and this is one that is very, like, you don't want to get here pretty much. She will say, we are connected. At the end of every round in this cycle, the Spirit of Darkmoor will cast Backdraft worth the amount of pips she has on a random wizard. This is an X-pip fire trap type deal, so she can start casting like 100% traps on you pretty much if you get, like, every round if you get to this cycle. So try not to let that happen, I'm going to say that. And then at the beginning of the 5th round in that cycle, she will cast a 12% Fire Spear, 40% Fire Blade, Combustion, and Fire from Above to the highest threat wizard. Basically just copy-paste what I said about the life cycle for this. And that will end the fire cycle, and then she will loop back to the myth cycle. So very, very hard boss. And, I mean, like I said before, you can blade and trap, but she will punish that severely and deal a lot of damage to you. So just be very careful in this fight. So yeah, I mean, if you're in a team, you can feint stack, but you need to take care of her quick is basically just what we're getting at. And she has these Darkmoor Gargoyle minions. These are Myth. They used to have Earthquake, but it looks like they don't anymore. So that's nice. But they do still have spells like Basilisk, Medusa, Myth Imp. So good luck if you're a life or a death. So just something to keep in mind there as well. The final fight is against Shane Von Shane, and this boss it's going to require like a very odd strat, I guess, so I'll get to that in a moment. But he is a death boss, 19,470 HP, 40% outgoing pierce. So here's the thing with him. You can't feint him. If you do, he'll say, "I can see through you," and interrupt cast a Dark Pact on himself, which will take off the trap. And, you know, he will also say, "I will not bow down to you," if a harmful charm is cast on him, like a weakness, that type of deal. And he will sacrifice on himself, so just healing pretty much. And if you heal, he will cast a version of Vampire that does 1,050 death drain damage, so don't heal either. So there's that. It is his interrupt cycle that is the hard part here. So the first one is "We feast tonight." That's what he'll say. At the beginning of the second round in the cycle, Shane will interrupt cast a version of Vampire, the one that I said before, that does 1,050 death drain damage. And then at the beginning of the third round, he will say "The monster begins to rise," which he will then cast a version of Dr. Von's monster that deals 900 death drain damage. And then the last one is the heaviest hit of all. He will say "It's a graveyard smash" at the beginning of the fourth round in the cycle. And when he does that, that will be a version of Monster Mash that deals 1,170 death damage, and it will beguile a random wizard. So keep that in mind as well, and this will continue to repeat. But here is how you reset the cycle. If he is damaged at any point during the above interrupt cycle, he will reset back to the start. I think in practice he does not actually reset back to the start. I think that might be bugged, but regardless, you will at least stop the cycle for that turn. So basically, you just have to have somebody on your team hitting him every single round, which gets to be a bit mind-numbing, but it is still required, and damage over time effects will reset it. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. You just need to hit him every single turn, and you'll be fine. But he does have these two minions, the Darkmoor Surf, which is basically a stronger version of the Eidolon from the Akhtang fight. Just, you know, be wary of Stormlord, max bolts, I guess, he can hit those, and then Leviathan is the big one you got to worry about, and then Sirens as well, so keep that in mind. And then he's also got the Gargoyles from the Spirit fight, so just a lot of stuns coming out of those. So there is that. I do think that the Spirit of Darkmoor herself is probably the hardest fight in the dungeon. This fight against Shane is a little easier, but you can still lose control of the match very, very quickly if you don't have somebody spamming Shane every single round. So that is an important part. One quick thing to mention is that this is the first time you will actually get a useful drop from any boss in Darkmoor, and that, of course, is going to be the Amulet. And the Amulet gives 4% outgoing pierce and 4% resist, as well as some decent item cards. So this is, in my opinion, best in slot for level 100, so just something to keep in mind if you want to, I guess, farm Shane and do this whole dungeon. Actually, you technically don't have to do the whole dungeon. You can. There's actually a skip to the end that can be done, but, you know, still, I mean, Amulet, it's really not that big of a deal, I'll be real, and you can just keep using the Jewel of the Faint as well if you want to. And so we arrive at the graveyard. If you've made it past the upper halls, congratulations, and enjoy your new spell. That one's going to be pretty useful. And now, though, it is time for the real meat and potatoes of the video, and for Darkmoor itself. Darkmoor's graveyard is what most people farm because you can get the best in slot hats, robes, boots, athames, and technically rings, but I'll get into that in a moment. But you get the point. This is where most people are going to actually like do the fighting and team up and farm for the gear. So there's that. First on the list is going to be Yevgeny NightCreeper. This is the first boss that you will encounter here in Darkmoor. He is a moon boss with masteries of Ice, Myth, and Death. 55 outgoing Pierce, by the way. So keep this in mind. And this boss is, I mean, I deemed him completely unsoloable, so, you know, like, good luck with that. But Yevgeny actually does drop the best in slot Athames for this level, so that is one thing that you could do. Yevgeny's Athames are easily the best now that the Morgantha Athames have been gutted. I really miss the old ones because, you know, they were really good back in the day, but right now, Yevgeny's Athames are the best. So this is where you go for those. Now, his first cheat is blade counters. Basically, if a wizard casts a blade spell, Yevgeny will cheat cast freeze on the wizard, which will stun the wizard, and you can use conviction. Most people do. Conviction treasure cards can be used to try countering this cheat for some stun resistance for a few turns, and I like that. I think it's a good thing to do, especially because all of his minions are these anguished wraiths, and they have you know, stunning spells of their own. You know, Frost Giant is in there, and that is something that you want to avoid as best you can. So Conviction is the best way to counter the blade counter cheat. If a wizard casts a helpful ward spell, like a shield or an absorb, he will pierce the target of the ward spell. So basically just can't shield, that type of deal. And then the last cheat here is I Vex You. If a wizard casts a harmful charm, like a weakness, Yevgeny will cheat cast Bad Juju on the wizard. So try not to do that. You don't want to be dealing with the Juju. So now it's time for Yevgeny's interrupt cycles. We saw these on, like I said, Blackwater and the Spirit of Darkmoor. So this is no different, the first of which is the Ice Interrupt cycle, and at the beginning of every round in this cycle, he will say, I wrap you in armor, and he will cast Frozen Armor on himself or one of his minions, just with however many pips he has. And then at the beginning of the 5th round in this sub-cycle, and like this is when he will cast Katabatic Wind, 20% Ice, Pierce, and Critical Bubble, Mass Ice Trap, 45% Ice Blade, and an Abominable Weaver. That will put a shield on him, so keep that in mind as well. And this, unlike Spirit of Darkmoor, yeah, it was the Spirit of Darkmoor. Unlike her, this spell will target the wizard with the lowest current health. So keep that in mind. And once we get to the secondary interrupt cycle after these three, yeah, you'll see why that's a problem. So there is that to think about as well. Then rounds 6 through 10 are his Myth interrupt cycle. And at the beginning of every round in this cycle, he will cast Buff Minion on himself or one of his minions. Pretty strong blade there. And then at the beginning of the 5th round in this sub-cycle, he will say, Crush my enemies, and basically do the exact same thing as the Spirit of Darkmoor did in her Myth cycle. So, yeah, it just buffs up a ton and then sends a Mystic Colossus. Then the Death interrupt cycle is the last one. He will say, I decimate you, and that's at the beginning of every round in the cycle. He will cast a 75% feint at a random wizard. You don't want to get here, like needless to say. And then at the beginning of the 5th round in this sub-cycle, he will say, Klaatu Barada Nikto, and that is when he will cast a Doom and Gloom, so not the Age of Reckoning or whatever it is, so you don't actually have to worry about this being a buff, but he will cast a Death Blade, 45%, a Math Death Trap, and then a Call of Cthulhu. So yeah, don't get here, especially because he's probably going to have feints on all of you. So the secondary interrupt cycle here that he has is Fear the Howl of the Moon. On the 3rd round, at the end of the 3rd round of this cycle, he will cast a Shift Chaney, which will deal 800 life damage, and this chains perfectly into his interrupt cycles, where, in the ice one specifically, where he will send an Abominable Weaver at the wizard with the lowest current health. That is usually whoever gets hit by the Shift Chaney. So depending on your RNG, if your Storm Hitter gets hit by the Shift Chaney, you really do not want to get to round 5. Like, I'm just going to say that, because otherwise the round is chalked. Then at the end of round 6, he will say Fear the Bite of Dragonspire, casting a fire version of Shift Akhtang, which will deal 1000 fire damage. And then at the end of the 9th round, he will cast a moon version of Shift Blackwater, which will deal 1200 moon damage. So This will then begin to repeat. Round 12, he will say Fear the Howl of the Moon again and cast the Shift Chaney, that type of deal. So basically just, yeah, you don't want to be in this fight for too long because it becomes unwinnable after round, like, 7 or something like that. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind. But yeah, I've been explaining this fight for 6 whole minutes anyway. So that is the Yevgeny NightCreeper fight. Like I said, he does drop the Athames, and I mean, he is just a pain in the neck to fight, is what I'm saying. So yeah, just be on your guard. This boss is very, very hard. But yeah, Yevgeny NightCreeper, first boss in the graveyard. That's how that's going. Now I want to break for a moment and talk about an optional boss in the graveyard named Aphrodite II. And this is the boss. This is a stone skeleton key boss, which you can access technically before Yevgeny, but she will be off behind the gate with a stone skeleton key lock on it. And oh man, this is so annoying to do, but she does drop the best in slot rings. These are rings that will give, you know, a ton of pip chance and then 12 universal damage. Nothing can really compare to that at the level. So yeah, the boss is just really, really painful to do. I mean, she's got 35% pierce, but it's 4 of these tendrils. There are death tendrils, there are myth tendrils, and there are life tendrils. You'll get like an assortment of all of those. And yeah, so here's what needs to happen here. You remember the Shane Von Shane cheat where you had to hit every single turn? Yeah, it's back. So you definitely need somebody to come through and just spam hit at least one of the tendrils. So, because if you don't, here's what will happen. Okay, so on any round that a tendril is not attacked, Aphrodite will cast a unique spell on all wizards, which will deal 333 shadow damage and 666 shadow damage over 3 rounds, and applies a minus 30% damage charm, a minus 40% mantle, and a minus 50% infection. You don't want that. So you need to hit every single round to stop that. So there's that, but at that point, you at least have that down. But here's what makes it even more annoying. Once you have that down, if a blade damage charm or damage increasing global spell is cast like a Dark Wind, the tendril across from the wizard will cheat cast one of the following spells. A death tendril will cheat cast a Scarecrow and put a feint 75% on a random wizard. The life tendril will cast Forest Lord and technically a guidance, I guess, but that doesn't really matter too much. But the one that you want to avoid the most is the myth tendril, because the myth tendril will cast an earthquake and then stun. So that's bad. So, yeah, you don't want that at all. So when the tendril across from a wizard has been defeated, that wizard may then safely cast blades without triggering the cheat. So basically, no blades, you have to hit every turn, and you can technically trap, but it is a little tough. So there is that as well. You also don't want to cast any damage over time spells, because if you do that, a death tendril, if it's across from you, will cheat cast a Deer Knight, which isn't too bad, but then the life tendril will cheat cast a mass triage, which will take all of the dots off, and the myth tendril will shift it right back over to you. So avoid doing that. And then if a wizard is ever defeated, then like a death tendril will cheat cast a feint, a life tendril will cheat cast a guidance, and the myth tendril will cheat cast a stun. So this boss is exceedingly annoying, and you need so many stone keys to get the rings, but you can get the best rings in slot for level 100 from this boss if you are, I guess, brave enough. So there is that. But it's not just these rings that drop either. You can also get some decent energy Athames, also energy rings and energy wands. So that is another reason to farm Aphrodite, but still, personally, it's torture, and I personally wouldn't. Like, you can get away with the Alpha and Omega ring for a little while longer. So that's how I feel about the Aphrodite fight. Just wanted to briefly go over it because this is where the best in slot rings will be dropping at level 100, and it technically is part of Darkmoor, so why not? So with Aphrodite out of the way, you get to the least useful part of Darkmoor, that being the Shane von Shane star fight. And this one, yeah, the original Shane von Shane drops the best in slot amulet for this level, and I mean, it's not like the most important piece, but still the best in slot for level 100. This version does not, so yeah, I kind of wish he did, because then, you know, we would be, like, this would be an actually useful fight, but he doesn't, so there's that. Anyway, he has pretty much the exact same thing going on as his original version, where, you know, you don't want to, you really don't want to go without hitting him every round, because otherwise he'll do his thing that I was talking about before, where he'll eventually monster mash and beguile your hitter, and your hitter kills everybody pretty much. So that's how that goes. But this one has some extra cheats as well. He will say, I revel in my power. If a wizard casts a helpful charm like a blade, he will cheat cast a supercharge on himself. If your hitter is a storm, actually, though, you can wait for him to get a bunch of pips and then steal the charm. So it's a neat little strat. I personally recommend it, but yeah, can be useful. If you cast a harmful charm on Shane, okay, like I kind of went over this already. It's like if you weakness him, he'll sacrifice on himself, that type of deal. Can't faint, just like before. Can't heal, just like before. But this time, every time you hit him, he will cheat cast a version of Healing Current on himself. And yeah, yeah, it's like your spammer could at least deal some damage in the first fight, but not here. So yeah, and I mean, he's got 55 Pierce as well. Star School boss with a Mastery of Death. He does know Glowbug Squall, but one important thing to note is that he does not have a Mastery of Storm. So, technically speaking, you aren't facing, like, sudden death, pretty much. So, there is that at least, unless he gets, like, 5 pips usually, and then he can use the Glowbug Squall, but otherwise you'll mostly be getting hit by death spells in this fight. So, just something to keep in mind. So there is that. Otherwise, yeah, there's not really much else here. Like, he has a Storm Interrupt cycle where he'll, like, blade himself, then give himself a speaker, then put a Galvanic Field. It's basically like the cheats that I've been talking about this whole video, where they, like, just buff up a bunch and then send a hit, but this one is just over 4 rounds instead of all in one, so just something to keep in mind. But otherwise, this Shane does not really have much else that's different outside of the fact that he has some extra Storm resist. So if you are a Storm and you don't have, 50 Pierce, then I would recommend bringing a Prism to this fight. So a little something to keep in mind. But yeah, otherwise, nothing useful drops from here. Like, I'll just say that right now. And so we've reached the final fight, Malistaire the Undying. And yeah, this one is quite an unfun one. So, yeah, pretty much what happens here is if you cast a universal damage blade, like a balance blade, or like a tower shield, that type of deal, he will steal it, so just try not to do that. You also can't feint him if you don't have protection on it, so he will cast Cleanse Ward, and then if you put like a mantle or a weakness, he'll cast Cleanse Charm, and all of that. So, or actually no, if you place a weakness in specific, he will cast Empower, so that is something to keep in mind. And if you use a single target damage spell against Malistaire, he will cast a 55% Black Mantle on you, so kind of, yeah, it's like, it's not terrible, but you can fizzle your next attack. And then he has this primary interrupt cycle, where he will say, at the end of the third round in the cycle, he will say, Fear the power of Dragonspire, and he will polymorph into a black dragon and attack a random wizard, dealing 535 moon damage and destroying any aura effects. Something to mention as well, he has 40% outgoing pierce and also a 25% death outgoing damage boost, so that is another thing to keep in mind. And at the end of the fourth round, he will cast a Sun version of Deadly Minotaur on a random wizard, and at the end of the fifth round, he will cast an aura that grants him a plus 50% outgoing death damage and 20% power pip chance for 5 rounds. So, yeah, I mean, just, like, be sure you kill him quick. But the issue with killing him quick, let's talk about this secondary interrupt cycle. So, this secondary interrupt cycle activates at the beginning of the 5th round, repeating itself every 4 rounds. He will say, its power shakes your spells apart. At the beginning of the 5th round, Malistaire's Skeletal Dragon will remove all charms and wards from each wizard. And yeah, that'll just delete all your blades. So you do absolutely want to, be ready for that. Be sure you're hitting on the 4th round. Make sure you're keeping count, and then you'll be fine. So yeah, I mean, it is, once you figure the fight out, it won't be so bad, but it's just, you do still want to keep track of what round it is, so that way you don't get earthquaked, quote unquote, is what people call it. So yeah, just make sure you do that, and you should be fine. Now, people have packed things like Doom and Gloom to, I guess, sort of cut down on the health that the second life gets, but ultimately it's not as useful as it used to be. So I will say that the Malistaire fight has gotten easier since release, but that does not mean it is not still hard. So yeah, let's talk about Haunted Malistaire. That is going to be the second form after you defeat the initial Malistaire form. He will come back with a second life, and that is Haunted Malistaire. So this version of Malistaire has 65 Pierce, so even if you have Resist, no you don't, just for all intents and purposes. So when this happens, he will turn into Haunted Malistaire, a shadow boss, and the boss will interrupt cast a shadow spell at the beginning of the round that'll set its max health to 48,000, restore about 100,000 HP, and loses all shadow pips permanently. Now, this is where Doom and Gloom is useful. If you have a 75% treasure card Doom and Gloom present, then this will actually really help with the healing portion of it. So that way, he'll only regain 25,000 health as opposed to his usual 48,000. So keep that in mind as well. And yeah, so he will retain all of the above cheats, except for the primary interrupt cycle. So, the Fear the Power of Dragonspire, Gift from Tartarus, that sort of thing. He won't be doing that anymore. But he does have his own new primary interrupt cycle. So there is that to keep in mind. At the end of the first round of this cycle, he will cast a Shadow Blade on himself. At the second round, he will cast Shadow Spear on himself. At the end of the third round, he will cast a Mass Shadow Trap. And at the end of the fourth round, he will cast Shadow Steel, which does 1,600 shadow damage and converts 100% of the damage to health. So, with all the buffs in mind, that's usually doing about 2,600 on top of any extra buffs that he might use that'll make it do even more. So keep that in mind as well. And his secondary interrupt cycle is the same as his first form, where he'll say its power shakes your spells apart. Basically just the same thing. You absolutely want to just hit him quick, and that'll take care of it. So just something very important to keep in mind there. But there is one saving grace of a cheat that occurs during this form. He will say, "Curse you, beast, do not defy me," and his Skeletal Dragon will randomly place a 100% universal trap on Malistaire and any of his remaining allies, which he probably won't have any by this point. So he can spawn with any of these random Draconian minions, like the Draconian Diviner is one that you really don't want to get, so that is one thing for sure. But yeah, I mean, once that happens, if you can get a 100% universal trap, and it is completely random when this happens, then you will have a much higher chance of finishing the fight much quicker. So that is something to keep in mind. But with all of that in mind, just making sure you hit before like the earthquake cheat happens, and making sure you stay on top of that, make sure you're counting, then you can defeat him and reap the rewards. Now the rewards, of course, are going to be very, very good, and I'm going to get back on my balance to show you all of the Darkmoor gear. Every single piece. I have every single piece on my balance. So let's go over those now. So now it's time to take a look at all of the pieces of gear that you can get from Darkmoor, and I've got them all on my balance, actually, except for the wand, I'm pretty sure, right? Or no, I do have the wand, okay, but we'll go over that in a moment. So, first on the list is these hats. These drop from Malistaire the Undying, the final fight at the very end of the storyline here in Darkmoor. This is just an amazing hat. It's like it is such an upgrade. The Mask of the Exalted One from Balance, of course, but this is just such an upgrade from Waterworks. It is so good. All of that pip chance, all of that resist and damage, and the shadow rating is pretty nice too. So yeah, the hats drop from Malistaire the Undying. Definitely get this. This is a must-have once you get to level 100 and finish with Darkmoor. For the robes, these are the robes. I mean, they look like him, so that's what's up. And then these honestly really fix your utility stat problem for the foreseeable future. These give a lot of pip chance and a ton of accuracy. And accuracy is very important. Of course, because, you know, up to this point, you probably fizzled a bunch of times, and you probably hate that, so having all this extra accuracy can be very helpful. On a Balance Wizard, actually, this will get you 1% away. Like, this piece alone will get you 1% away from having perfect accuracy to every balance spell that is, I guess, not a shad or a lore spell or a gambit, so that's what's up. And then, you know, you look at things like the resist on this, also very good. The health and the shads, pretty good. But then you get to the boots, and these will cover most of the rest of the accuracy, and, you know, a lot of extra pip chance, a lot of good damage, and pierce. So, absolutely, I mean, like, that's just really good. So, definitely get these boots as well. These are probably the best in slot, outside of, like, I guess, pack boots, but, you know, and there is actually a Chrysalis gear set that I will briefly touch on. The Chrysalis gear set, like, it's going to be stuff like this. It's very high damage, but, you know, you do give up some stats for it, so if you do want a more well-rounded set, I would recommend the Darkmoor set. So, there is that as well. And then for the wand, Staff of the Voidstalker, this is honestly not that good at all, and this, and this all drop from Malistaire the Undying. So, just something to keep in mind. A full run of Darkmoor will get you all of this. So, there's that. But the wands are unfortunately not that great. They do give a lot of crit, block, and pierce, but they don't give any damage. And that is where wands like the Chrysalis wand really shine a lot. So, I mean, 18 damage, hard to pass that up. So, yeah, I mean, this is the one piece, in my opinion, that outclasses Darkmoor at level 100. So, there is that, and there's that. So, yeah, but you'll need to farm Chrysalis for this, whereas this will drop from here in Darkmoor from Malistaire the Undying. So, just to recap, this drops from Malistaire, this drops from Malistaire, these drop from Malistaire, and this drops from Malistaire. These will drop from the tree root bosses in the Shadow Palace. So, that is the best in-slot wand, but this is still kind of cool, I guess. So, there you have that. This is the Yevgeny of Fame. This is the one that I was, you know, waxing poetic about from before, you know. All that pip chance, a little bit of extra accuracy never hurts either. Lot of damage, and some incoming healing is nice as well. And if you are upgrading from the Blade of the Foul Titan, you are also now getting an extra circle slot for some extra pierce. So, pretty nice as well. For the amulet, this is the one that drops from Shane Von Shane, not in the graveyard, but in the upper halls. I really wish that the Shane in the graveyard would drop this, but he does not. Please, KingsIsle developers, do us a solid. So, there you go. The cards are just going to be a Shadow Shield and your Aztec at School aura. So, her balance, that will be punishment. So, just something to keep in mind there. And then, the Signet of Carpaths, this is the balance version of the Aphrodite ring. Like I said, so much pip chance, lot of damage, and a good amount of health as well. Some incoming healing, I guess, can be helpful as well. And then, you know, the sockets are the same, as always. But, I mean, this is just such a pain to get, and if you can get the Alpha and Omega ring, I would honestly not recommend going for this, just because it's going to take so long. I mean, I think it took me 80 runs to get this on my balance, so pretty insane to think about. Okay, so not really any pets or mounts that drop from here. But there is one more thing that I have not touched on yet, and that is the decks. Now, this is the Darkmoor deck. The Lovelorn Spirit Set of Woe is the balanced version, and as you can see, pretty damn solid for level 100. You know, gives some extra health, some crits, some shadow resist, which is pretty neat, and an extra starting pip. And obviously the triangle socket is good too for some extra utility stats if you have jewels for that. But those can be crafted here from Harker, and this is an important part. Like you see here, the Bound Spirits cards. This is the Myth version. You are going to need some moats. Those are kind of the hard part. So here's the base deck for Myth Wizards. So the deck of the Bound Spirit, you will need this, and you'll need a Mote of Wisdom, Beauty, Eternity, and Severity. I believe the Wisdom motes will be dropping from Kembalung Village. Motes of Beauty will drop from Barkingham Palace. Motes of Severity will drop from House of Scales, and then Motes of Eternity will drop from here to Darkmoor. So these are a pain in the neck to get, I will say that much, but it is worth it, because you can have a deck with these stats and that amount of copies. Like, it's pretty solid. You will also need some fish and some reagents that you can just sort of buy. So there's that. For the Exekia Shiners, I'm pretty sure you can find these in Zafaria, I want to say. They're also available here in this little pond next to Castle Darkmoor, but you pretty much get the point. So these are the best in slot decks. They are going to take a lot of farming as well, but eventually you will be able to craft them, and you will not regret doing so, I promise. So there's that, and yeah, I mean, overall, just very, very good. Wow, I mean, these decks are really, really great for the level that you can get them at, so just something to think about. And that is going to wrap up this long-winded guide for Castle Darkmoor and all of the bosses that you could find here. So that's mostly just going to wrap up. I hope this guide outclassed the one that I made back in the end of May, but yeah, definitely leave a comment, so just let me know. And with that being said, thank y'all for watching. I've been Ice Gold. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave like 50 comments for the algorithm. My Discord is down in the description if you want to chat with me some more, and I will see y'all later.